Christine. Welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Brett.
Well, this is a tale of multiple conversations, and let's start with your podcast, Half Naked. So I want my listeners to know we are clothed. I am clothed. That's why they say
I only see you from the waist up. I don't know what's going on underneath. Okay?
Yeah, well, I'm wearing shorts, I promise you. But this last year, I don't know, with Zoom meetings, there have been a lot of people who have been literally caught without their pants on during Zoom meetings. So, but this podcast is great, and it's a lot of fun. You just started your second season of this, correct?
Yeah, I did. And it's been a lot more work than I anticipated, which I'm sure you can attest to. I started it out over the pandemic, as a creative outlet for me and to really sort of piqued my interest about a bunch of things. And the more I started talking to people about various different subjects that are considered as taboo as underwear, right? Because we just don't talk about that either. The more I really started to enjoy it and learn things from it. So it's been a really rewarding experience. And of course, it's a lot of work, which most rewarding things are.
Yeah, but it's a labor of love, I think, really. That's why I do it,
Yeah.
When you're starting out and you don't have like a following per se, well, even some celebrities who do start podcasts who have a following, they realize that it is a lot of work, not you necessarily, because you obviously know what it takes, but really it's the effort of scheduling interviews and finding people to talk to.
Yeah, finding people that interest you and things that you like to talk about, so that it inspires you, and then that'll in turn inspire listeners. So that's been the best part, actually, is finding people to talk to. And it's a process that I go through myself. Of course, people are pitched to me all the time, and I have, my way of looking people up and seeing if it'll be a meaningful conversation, because I want to be interested in them and I want them to be interested in doing it too. But it's fun to for me to do my own research and then go online and send people a DM on Instagram and tell them about my show. And that's been like the coolest part too of, leveraging, a verified Instagram account to communicate with people. I think that's been like a total perk.
Do people respond to you quicker because of the fact of that reason?
I don't know. I mean, I couldn't tell you that. I couldn't, because I don't know the alternative, but I'm sure it helps. I do know that, the algorithm, it certainly puts the messages in a different folder, right? So
Yes.
that, yeah, I mean, that helps, but they'll have to be interested in doing it too. It doesn't mean just because I, have that doesn't mean they'll want to do it,
No, I ask only out of curiosity, because I think finding people that you're interested in and then that you feel that your audience would be interested in, it's a bit of a challenge, right? Because I get pitched all the time too. Obviously, when somebody like yourself comes along, I know your publicist, I've worked with her for the last 2 years. So anybody that she pitches me, I'm like, yes, let's get them on the podcast. But it can be a bit of a challenge. But this show, from what I understand, was really inspired by the research you were doing, right, to design your own lingerie line and have people come on to talk about the history of underwear, boxer shorts, whatever the case might be.
Right.
Let's talk about that a little bit and your experience with that and sort of how it fed into the podcast.
Yeah. I actually went to fashion school.
Okay.
And I don't really talk about that a lot, but I did. It was something that always interested me, and I never knew how I would use it in the future. Acting is my passion, and I'm lucky that I've been able to turn that into my profession. But at a time, when we weren't really working, and I'm trying to find other ways to stay creative, and I started designing. And I love women's intimates. I love lingerie, and I love our relationship with them and how it changes over the years of our lives through experiences or, just markers through age or whatever. And as I start talking to my friends and other women about their undergarments, it started to open a much deeper conversation, because at first people are like, oh my God, no one's ever asked me that, like what I like. And then,
Yes.
because because we just don't talk about it, right? They're like our unmentionables, and we call them the unmentionables for a reason because we don't mention them.
Right. I mean, I probably wouldn't talk to you about that if that wasn't the
Yeah,
focus
that
of
might
your
be weird.
podcast.
I mean,
I
it's,
probably would get an email afterwards from somebody saying, "Why did you talk about this?" But I get it.
it definitely helps that I'm a woman and I'm talking to other women, and but I'm able to do it in a way that I think is disarming. But at first, people are taken off guard a bit and like confused, and they've never really been asked that. But I found that the more I did talk about it to people that were willing to talk about it, of course, the more excited they became. And I start to realize, like, oh, wow, people really have things to say about it, whether it was something that they bought that was not really representative of them, or they made it made them feel a certain way, or they did something for someone else, or someone else brought them something and it made them like re-examine how they view their own self and their own body. But there was always this story attached. And I just started leaning into that and created the Half Naked podcast, where every single episode I kick off by saying, I want to picture you in your underwear. What kind of underwear are you wearing right now? and, and I just thought it was a really cheeky way, right? To like,
Very.
yeah, to start the conversation. But throughout doing this podcast and realizing that, underwear and bras and lingerie and boxers, all that stuff is considered taboo. And then I started to like think about, well, what else is considered taboo? And like, what else do I like to talk about? So I talk about everything on the podcast from underwear to mental health, right? And relationships. And that's been really great because I've learned so much by the guests I've had on. And that has been really fueling for me.
Yeah, it's a very honest and transparent show. I've listened to several episodes
Oh,
prior to
thanks.
our conversation. Yes, of course. And I find that you have a very special way of getting people to talk about things. Your personality is very disarming. So you can get people to come in and talk about things that they wouldn't normally discuss. And I think that just has to do with you as
Oh,
an
thanks.
individual. It's very
Thank you.
true. Does that
Yeah.
make sense at all? I mean, you get it?
I
It's
mean,
kind of like,
that's a really nice thing to say. I think that's, one of the nicest things you can say to somebody is that, people trust me enough to talk to me, and I love to share my own experiences. And that was hard too. I'm an actress. I'm not on the other side of the camera often interviewing people, and I'm certainly not talking about my personal life so much. Anytime you've really seen me talking about things in interviews, it's always about the project that I'm doing and the role that I'm playing and my experience with that. But it's not really like stripping myself down, in more ways than one. And I think that was difficult for me to do. And it took a lot of, it really, I really had to talk myself into it, really. But the more
okay.
I started to do it, the more I felt comfortable doing it. But I've always loved to talk to people. And, off the record, I am really honest. It was just doing it on the record that was really difficult for me. But thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it's very true. And I could see why people would be turned on by it in the sense of like, okay, well, we're getting a side of Christine that we wouldn't normally see.
Yeah.
Like you said, when most people do press like this, we're talking about The Walking Dead or Fear the
Hmm.
Walking Dead or
Yeah. You were
a
just saying,
movie.
you just got off a press junket before we were talking, and like,
Yeah.
what did you talk about? You didn't ask them about their underwear, I'm sure, but you would ask them about the jobs they had, not like their childhood and their
Yeah.
relationship with their parents, And those are
Yeah.
all the things that I'm asking about, and I'm talking about myself. So it's
Yeah.
really
I
neat.
think that's what's attractive about most podcasts is the
Yeah.
honesty that we get. And that's what makes this format so much different than, say, radio or
Yeah.
television.
It's
Unless
unedited.
you're on like, yeah, Rogan or maybe like Stern, where they get personal with their guests. But past that, it's not, yeah, like the press junket for Wild 'N Out. It's like, what can people expect from this season? Or
Mhm.
how do you
Yeah.
craft the perfect roast or an out of pocket joke? It's not like,
Yeah.
let's talk about your decision when you dropped out of high school and decided that
Yeah.
you wanted to be a comedian.
And I think, the past year podcasts have like blown up,
They
right?
have.
Because I think we all really want those meaningful and intimate conversations. I think it's nice being able to connect on things and realize that like we have far more that bonds us than not. I mean, the world is a really divisive place right now. And the more we can have conversations to humanize us all and show us that we are all more alike than not, I think that's like a really great thing to do. I really like being a part of that. And that's really my objective with Half Naked, is to show that we all put on our underwear one leg at a time, unless of course you're going commando, and we could talk about that too. But
Yes.
and I think that's cool. But podcasts like really give us the opportunity to do that. And I mean, I just took a 2-hour drive back from I was in New Jersey earlier today, and I just drove back out to Long Island and had a podcast on the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. Capturing that audience
Yeah.
for a short amount of time and getting them into your world. It's really great. So I want to touch on this topic because when I did research you, and as I get, press kits and things, fashion school, that's not something that's really out there in the ether. So we
Mhm.
have the exclusive here. I want to ask, so I've talked to thousands of actors, celebrities like yourself who did something before they started acting. They had a job, they waited tables. Some recently drove Uber and Lyft until they got a position on a show where they could really kind of take control of their career. But you were in fashion school, which is a big thing to take advantage of and decide that you're going to go do. Like in that time frame, I'm very curious, like what clicked for you to say, I want to do acting versus, just spend the rest of my life designing clothes? Because that's a big jump.
Yeah, it is. Well, I will say that I have had every job under the sun. Before that, I've worked everywhere from like a bakery to McDonald's to a hair salon to a short selling stock company, right? Like I've always
Oh,
been
wow.
a total hustler. I absolutely love to work. I've always earned my own money. I grew up on Staten Island, and I come from a very working class, blue collar Italian family. My father worked for the fire department. My mother was a nurse. And I was always a performing arts kid, right? Like I went to school in between Staten Island and Manhattan every single day. I was always in dancing school. I was always in acting school. I loved it. And I think that made my parents really nervous. My parents work for the city. There's a lot of stability there, emotionally and financially. And when I said I wanted to be an actress, they were like, "Oh, well, it's good. It's been good for you to do this stuff, but like, why don't you go to school for something else?" And the irony now is like I chose fashion, which is no more stable than the performing arts and acting. But I always loved it. I was doing a lot of modeling at that time, and I was working for I was doing a lot of work with like 17 magazine. I was like a featured
Okay.
young, I don't want to say editor, that's way too big of a title, but I was contributing a lot to the magazine, and I was in the city, and I just loved the idea of going to a really creative school. And FIT is one of the best in the world for fashion, and it was right in my backyard. And I went, and I loved it. But while I was going, I was still acting. I was still going to my theater classes. I was doing plays. I was going on auditions. And then I got a job, and I was filming that for a few months, and I was able to like really financially support myself and just take the jump and go for it. So it wasn't until that I realized like I'm not really going to do something with this degree right now. This is the job that I want to continue to pursue. And fortunately my parents understood that.
Yeah, that's great. It's always nice when you have the support of your family,
Yeah.
especially when you're taking such a big jump to
Yeah.
do something like acting, which
Yeah.
even some of the most seasoned folks will say it's never a guarantee. But I feel like you've found yourself in a safe place. You've done a
Yeah.
lot of work.
I wouldn't call it safe, but
Well, unless you like
I
get
love
eaten your
it. I
face
love
off by
it.
a zombie or something, but past that, um, well, let's talk about The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead. Now that we're talking about acting, this is a show that has been on for a very long time. It's outlasted
Mm.
Friends, Seinfeld, anything that outlasts Friends or Two and a Half Men, I say is a win. But we started out on The Walking Dead, your character, Sherry, which is where we got introduced to you. And I know a lot of people have to say a lot of things about your character and your arc and why can't this happen or that happen. So we're going to stay away from that. But I want to talk about just your overall experience of getting on this show and then going from, appearing a couple times to now having a story arc on the spinoff Fear the Walking Dead. Let's talk about that process and what that was like for you.
I was so grateful to work on this show for so many reasons. Landing The Walking Dead was incredible. It's such a great show. I mean, this was years ago also when I first started working on it. Like, maybe it was like 6 years ago when I
Probably,
first
yeah, at least. I mean,
appeared
it's been
on The
on for a very
Walking
long
Dead,
time.
5 years ago or something. I did the audition in my living room. I taped it. There was no character attached to the script. They just made up a random script for the audition. And it wasn't until I got the job and was in Georgia about to film that I learned who I'd be playing. And I realized, Sherry's in the comic books, and I was really excited about it. But being on a show of that magnitude at the time also taught me so much.
Sure.
There's a reason the show is successful. Yes, it's a comic book series. It's beloved by fans as a comic book series, but it's hard. It's not always a shoo-in, right? And it's not always a guaranteed success to have a show that is on that long just because it's a series. There's a group of people that work on this show, actors, writers, the creators, that are the coolest people and the most hardworking people that I've ever met. I tell this story all the time, but I remember my first day on set of The Walking Dead, just found out who I was playing. I was going to be in a couple of episodes, didn't know much more than that. And Andrew Lincoln, who wasn't even working on the episode with me, drove to work for the day that I started to introduce himself to me and Austin Emilio, who plays Dwight, and to welcome us and to say, like, kick ass, we're glad that you're here. And that doesn't always happen. That's really rare. But if you have somebody that's like the number one on the call sheet, arguably the lead of the show, taking that stance and having that leadership, like seeing that so early on really impacted me. And it's like the kind of attitude that you really have to have for a show like that to really, I really think that has a lot to do with why it's so successful. The people that work on it are proud of it and they're really happy to be there, and they let you know that all the time. And that's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that's the show that everybody wants to be an extra on, that wants to be a stand-in on.
My father wants to be an extra on The Walking Dead. He tells me all the time he wants to be a zombie. It's very funny.
Yeah, well, I did some background work on some projects in New Mexico, and yeah, being a zombie is a lot of work. Like, it's not.
I mean, most of those guys are stunt workers. It is a lot of work. You're outside all day,
pouring buckets of blood on you.
Tons of buckets, and God knows what else they're pouring on all over you, pending the scene, right?
And you're in Atlanta filming, Georgia.
It's hot. Yeah.
It's interesting. When that first came out, that show, I was reading about it, and they were casting for extras like the first couple seasons. And I think it's when they had moved to Tyler Perry Studios to kind of film there on his property. And there's like different levels of zombies. Like there's an A's, B's, C zombie, like the people that you see up front.
There's a lot of zombies. There's a lot of zombies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is awesome show. If you haven't seen either one of them, you can binge watch it, but you have a lot of seasons to catch up.
You got a lot of work to do, man. Put on some comfortable clothes. You're going to be sitting down for a while.
Put on some comfortable boxer shorts or underwear, and then listen to this podcast half naked, and then watch a couple seasons in a day of The Walking Dead. You've done other projects as well. You had an arc on Chicago Fire, which I remember, and you've done a lot of other fun things. But overall in your career, as we wrap this conversation up, at what point did you know, Christine, okay, this is something, I mean, you obviously knew that acting was a passion for you and that you were going to do this for a long time, but was there a key moment in your career where you just had the light come on and you go, okay, I'm doing this and this is going to be my lot for the rest of my life as an actor?
Yeah, I remember being, maybe 18 years old, 18, 19, and I landed my first film. It was a small independent movie that I was starring in, playing a young stand-up comic, graduating high school, making her way into the world. And I immersed myself in that movie. I hung out with comics. I was hanging out in comedy clubs. I was low key performing the material off camera just to get into it. And I loved it. I love throwing myself into it. I love throwing myself into somebody else's life and learning about it. When you mentioned Chicago Fire, I rode on an ambulance for a week in Coney Island, like to see what it was like living as a paramedic. I recently did a pilot where I played a police officer and I rode in the back of a cop car for a few days up in Harlem. I love throwing myself into these experiences and quite literally standing in someone else's shoes. And that was I mean, I love it. And I think, that first film where I was a stand-up comedian and I got to see what it was like for a little while to be a comic. I love it. And I love how acting helps you tap into your own human experiences. And that's when I really started to love the craft. And once you love the craft of it, then you really appreciate it as an art form and you want to work on it as much as you can. And I think that's when my love of passion and my passion of acting just started to evolve from there.
I love it. Well, the podcast is Half Naked. We're in
Yes, it
season
is.
2. Yeah. You can listen to it on all the streaming platforms. It's available
Yeah.
everywhere. And Christine has some amazing guests as well. Also, Fear the Walking Dead. The Walking Dead, they're in their umpteenth season right now. And be sure to check out her arc on that. It was a lot of fun. And whatever else you have coming down the pike, we're excited for. Christine, thank you for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brett. It's good to be here.